I'm Leisha Skye. I am the CEO of the Trauma Research Foundation. I'm a body worker and a musician, and I teach workshops with Bessel occasionally when we don't have a pandemic. And right now, my job at the TRF is mostly around gathering our community together and helping us to connect with researchers who are doing things that are important to us and practitioners and providers who are doing important things for us. And it seemed like neurofeedback was a hole in our programming, and I was very anxious to just start a conversation and see who's out there. And so we put out a survey, and we got almost 600 responses from our community in a matter of just a couple weeks. And
wow.
that's a very powerful engine we have of connecting with people. So I welcome everyone who's here live or who may be watching later on in a recorded session. We have with us Sebern Fisher, who is a preeminent grande dame of neurofeedback and the person who influenced Bessel and introduced Bessel to neurofeedback. She's written the book, it's Rewiring the Fear-Driven Brain is all I remember of it. I'm
better title than it has, Leisha, so that's fine. We will look at the book later.
Yeah, and we will look at the book. And we have Ruth Lanius, who is one of Bessel's esteemed colleagues and who is a neuroscience researcher and clinician and amazing person who is helping us understand about the self, and Bessel van der Kolk, who I don't think you need an introduction really, Bessel. So I'm just going
to... I'd like to say one more sentence about Ruth.
Yes, please.
I consider Ruth the foremost neuroscientist in the area of trauma in the world, period. Despite her extreme youth. And Ruth really is making enormous contributions to help us understand what we see clinically by finding the neuroscience, and vice versa, by really understanding neuroscience, well, how it should affect our treatment. And so the audience is meeting with quite an eminent group of people, myself excluded. Okay.
And it might feel a little informal, especially my introduction, but I feel very close to everybody who's presenting for you tonight. And we're very, very lucky to have everybody here in this way.
I just want to say how honored we are to be here.
So this is a slide that got me into neurofeedback. And it's a somewhat complicated slide. And those of you who don't do science and apparatuses may not be enamored by it. But we all come to this from different angles. And I came to this because the man I call my best friend, Alexander McFarlane in Australia, did a piece of research in 1998 that was extremely alarming to me. And this is what he did. On the left-hand side, you see the brain's responses of 38 normal Australians to what's called an oddball paradigm. Let's say something like, if I make a sound like you need to figure out what I'm trying to do to suddenly do that. And so your brain needs to sort of focus and orient itself. And what you see here is that here are 38 normal Australians. I've never met normal people, but they're not. And what you see here is that the left hemisphere, the logical thinking part of the brain, gets activated when they hear a weird sound like The right brain, the emotional brain, the spatial brain, not so much. Traumatized people, the left brain that helps you figure things out, understand things, barely gets involved. The right brain, the part of you that makes you decide how it makes you feel, is very active. And that in and of itself very much captures what trauma is about. Trauma is not, you don't get traumatized because you're stupid or because you don't understand things or because someone needs to enlighten you. You get traumatized because a different part of your brain starts running the show And that's the part of the brain that is primarily devoted to, am I safe? What's going to happen to me? So there's not much cognition there. And then, so my question has always been, and that's why I've done all the various studies I've done, how do you get in that non-cognitive part of the brain that basically processes the world through just emotions? And then they do something else that was very innovative for at that time. They put electrodes on people's skulls, and they project those electrodes on the computer screen, and they see how the different parts of the brain, represented in different colors, communicate and work together to figure out what means. And so the first wave that normal brains create is an N200. An N200 is a filtering wave of your brain. It's like you may be hungry right now, or ready for a gin and tonic, or wish you had gone playing tennis. And this wave says, no, don't pay attention to the other stuff. Figure out what means. And so it's a filtering part of the brain. Traumatized people, no filtering wave. It's a huge finding, very important for understanding trauma, is that when you get traumatized, your brain is wide open. And it's very hard for you to say, oh, no, that's not important. Oh, that guy is just a fool. Oh, that person doesn't like me, but don't worry about it. To really stay focused on what you need to do. So the lack of the N200 is huge. The second piece, most of all, what you see here is that when you're not traumatized, the different parts of your brain work together to use all your capacities to figure out what means, and in a second you have figured it out. When you're traumatized, the different parts of your brain aren't really talking to each other, or talking to each other only in a minor way, and there's an internal disconnection. And to my mind, I go like, wow, that's really bad. So not only is there a lack of connection with other people, a lack of connection with your goals and desires, aspirations, but there's also a disconnection inside of your brain that makes it very hard to focus and to pay attention and to figure out what ordinary things mean. This is not a traumatic stimulus. This is a normal stimulus. Like stuff happens and you figure out what it means. So no filtering wave. And then the next wave that normal people create is the Peace 300. That's the wave that allows you to take something in and go like, okay, that's what I need to do. Traumatized people, lousy Peace 300. I live in Cambridge and Brookline, Massachusetts. I'm surrounded by very smart people. Many of the people I work with are very traumatized. Many of the people I work with are also very talented and very smart. But they keep telling me, you know, it takes me 5 times as long to read a paper or to read an announcement or to read a book than it does everybody else. I need to work so hard. Because it turns out that trauma makes it very hard to focus and to pay attention and have your brain work for you to just make it through everyday things. This, for me, is a huge issue. It's a huge public health issue because when you're traumatized, you have a hard time learning. You have a hard time getting along with your classmates. You have a hard time just fitting in and figuring out normal things to do because your brain is somewhere else. And so I see this piece of research and this brain that's disorganized versus this brain that's organized. And I go like, wow, that's very sad. In my lifetime, we'll probably never figure out how we can deal with that. And so it makes me very pessimistic about the future of trauma treatment. And that changes when I meet Sebern. Sebern, who as you'll soon see, is a very composed, thoughtful, wise person who has done her own work. And Sebern really introduced me to neurofeedback and says, no, you can change these brain patterns. And I just make a very long story very short. We met each other and she said, why don't you come and spend a weekend with me and my husband, and we'll do neurofeedback on you. And I'll have you meet some people who I've done neurofeedback on, so you can hear what neurofeedback can do to people. And so that was the beginning of my interest in neurofeedback. One more little thing as an introduction. I come back from my visit with Sebern for the weekend, come back to my clinic. I have a group of people. I have a very nice group of people at that time who work with me. And I say, boy, I learned this really exciting thing, neurofeedback. And I think I can get some people to teach us all to do it. In a few weeks is Memorial Day, when every normal person in New England goes to the beach or they go hiking. They don't stay working. And I asked people who would like to spend Memorial Day weekend sitting in the basement of the trauma center, learning shit. And 12 people say, I'd be delighted to do that. So it's very good to have a bunch of fanatical colleagues who join you in this. And I think we'll very much encourage you to find other fanatical colleagues, because that's very helpful. So we start doing neurofeedback on ourselves. And on day 2, one of my colleagues, his name is Richard, says, you know, guys, I want to stop you for a second, because something happened. And you all know me. I'm the training director of the Trauma Center. And you all know me as a very conscientious, thoughtful, hardworking, sincere, supportive person. And you probably know me as pretty uptight. I am uptight. The reason why I'm uptight is because I'm always scared. No matter where I am, on a deep level, I'm always afraid. And I've done all these treatments, but it's always there. And then yesterday, when I started the neurofeedback, I suddenly, for the first time in my life, felt what it felt like to not be scared. And I didn't want to say anything about it because, you know, it was just a fluke. But, you know, it's 24 hours later, and I still don't feel scared. And I thought I'd change that with you. And so everybody's really happy for Richard. And we see Richard relaxing. And Richard and I share an office. And our relationship completely changes. Now, we have certain times that I use the office, certain times he uses the office. And now, when I'm late and stay a little longer, he's waiting out there. He says, hey, Bessel, I know you're a very big shot person, but you know, we share this office. And when you say that you'll leave the office at 10:30 in the morning, I expect you to do so, you know, and not to linger. I said, you're right, Richard. And then a few weeks later, I leave a dirty coffee cup on the desk. And he says, you know, Bessel, I know that you're busy, have many important things you had, but you know, I'm not really here to be your cleaning lady, and you better clean up your own coffee cup. So I have to warn you that if you treat people and they get better, they may actually change your relationship. It gets worse. So Richard and I start working together. We set up this neurofeedback clinic at the trauma center, and things are going really quite nicely. And two years later, Richard comes into our joint office. He said, Bessel, you know, I've been doing a lot of neurofeedback. I say, I know, you're doing great. He says, yes, I'm doing great. In fact, you know, I've always wanted to be an artist. I said, I know. And he said, well, I'm going to be an artist. I said, and he said, what does it mean? He said, well, I'm actually giving my notice as training director of the trauma center. And I say, you can't do that to me. He says, yes, I can. Because I'm calm. And I'm not afraid of people anymore. And I can fall for my destiny. So be very careful having your friends or your spouse get better, because they just may have ideas to go off on their own. So I love to start my neurofeedback stories with that story, because it can really do something on a very deep level to help you to just be centered inside of yourself. That's basically all it does, I think. So that's my introduction to neurofeedback. And then maybe, would Sebern like to be next?
I think Ruth is up.
Who's the next? Okay.
All right, well, I just want to give my story about how I got into neurofeedback. And one day I phoned Bessel and we were talking about things, and he goes, I've got this neurofeedback training. I don't know if it was the Memorial Day neurofeedback training, but it was a neurofeedback training. Would you like to come down? I said, absolutely, Bessel. This is something I've been thinking about as well, and it makes intuitive sense. And so I flew down to Boston, and Sebern did the neurofeedback training, and she did the T4P4 protocol on me. And I remember, I had a lot on my mind. I was busy. My neck and my shoulders were tense, and Sebern put the electrodes on me, and I started to train. And all of a sudden, I could feel just relaxing, and I could feel the pain in my neck and shoulders just subsiding very slowly. And I thought, wow, this is really helpful. This makes a lot of sense. And this is really what you need if you've been traumatized. And so I got the neurofeedback training, and then Sebern also introduced me to Thomas Ross, who was a neurofeedback researcher in London, England at the time. And through this introduction, Thomas actually joined our lab, and that's where we began to embark on neurofeedback research and really trying to figure out what happens in the brain when people engage in neurofeedback. So that's just a little background to how I came to neurofeedback. And I want to share a few slides with you. Pat, if you could make me co-host so I can share my screen, that would be great.
You should be able to.
Okay, perfect. And Bessel and Sebern and I met last night, and we were talking about what we'll discuss today. And I was bringing up the fact that one thing that really made me excited about using neurofeedback is that when I started using it in some of my most complex patients, I saw a significant improvement. And I thought, wow, this is something that we can really use adjunctively in developmental trauma treatment. And this is something that really can benefit some of the most ill individuals. And I think that's one of the things that excited me most about it. So I want to start, I'm just going to do a very brief presentation, but I want to give you a case example of a woman who represents just that, and then just briefly show you, we recently published a randomized controlled trial of neurofeedback, alpha neurofeedback, how it can actually restore the network that may underlie our sense of self. And as we know, trauma really affects our sense of self, both on a cognitive level, but also on a somatic level. So I want to show you and really end on a note of hope how malleable these brain networks are. And of course, we know this clinically, how we can restore the sense of self. So we're going to talk about a form of neurofeedback called alpha neurofeedback, and all the references to neurofeedback will be with this alpha neurofeedback. And again, I'd like to thank all my collaborators, and this is an old version. I'm missing Bessel and Sebern. I apologize, and I want to particularly point out Thomas Ross and Rosie Kluch, who were part of the original studies, and Andrew Nicholson, who really helped to analyze the randomized controlled trial. So I want to share a case example. And this is a woman who was in her 40s, and she had a significant attachment disorder history. Her father was absent. Her mother was very intrusive, really not in tune with her at all, very controlling, very critical of her. And then what happened to her when she reached high school was that she was repeatedly gang raped over a couple of years. And over time, she deteriorated in her mid-20s, and she had repeated psychiatric admissions. In fact, she'd spent 8 years as a psychiatric inpatient altogether before I met her. She'd also been diagnosed with almost every diagnosis you can find in the DSM, except for post-traumatic stress disorder and except for dissociative disorder, both of which, in my opinion, she was suffering from. And I think she was really an amazing woman. I met her in my last month of residency training, and she presented in the Emerge department, shaking from head to toe, sitting in a chair. They couldn't even keep her in her own room because she was so anxious and so hyper-aroused. So she was sitting in the chair, shaking, completely non-functional. And I saw her, I did an assessment with her. We clicked right away. And it was clear to me that she was suffering from developmental trauma and significant PTSD and dissociative symptoms. And so, I'd explained this to her, and it made complete sense to her. And I think it gave her a lot of hope. And she said to me, Ruth, when you become a real doctor, can I be your patient? And I said, absolutely. And so after I graduated from psychiatry, we started working together. I'll call her Susie for today. And I learned a ton from Susie. And so we embarked on treatment. At the time, I was learning both body-based treatment and cognitive-based treatments. And so, I did some psychodynamic work with her. I did CBT with her. She attended DBT groups that I ran. We also did DBT individual therapy. We did some somatic experiencing. We did EMDR. We did sensory motor psychotherapy. We did ego state work. So she really, helped me to really learn an integrative treatment approach to trauma. And she did very well. So she returned to school. She became a dental hygienist. She became more social, and her life really started to expand, and her quality of life started to increase. And she was going along quite well until she was re-exposed to one of her perpetrators from the gang rape. And then she deteriorated significantly into these chronic dissociative states. So she was chronically depersonalized. She didn't feel like her body belonged to her. Severe attentional impairments. And it really makes me think of the network Bessel just showed us. She was completely out of it. She couldn't focus on anything. She couldn't focus on her body to see what she was feeling. She couldn't focus on the environment. She was completely gone. And if you saw her speak, you'd think, I wonder if she's over-medicated. And she really wasn't. She was taking simply an SSRI and trazodone, but completely out of it. And, she was looking at herself, trying to figure out whether this is her hand. And she wasn't sure, and just completely slowed. And it really makes me think of the brain waves that Bessel just showed us. And so I could bring her back to the present. I could bring her back into her body in treatment, but it wouldn't last. And so this was the time we just started doing neurofeedback. And I thought, I think she really needs neurofeedback. And she was a very curious person. And I said, Susie, we're experimenting with neurofeedback. This is what neurofeedback is. Would you be willing to, learn with us and give neurofeedback a try? And she said, absolutely. And so now we, in addition to, offering her this integrative approach that we've done so far, we could add neurofeedback to her treatment. So this image you see right now represents a drawing Susie did when she came into my office really dissociated. I tried to bring her back to the present. I tried to do a body scan with her, but she really had no words for what was happening. And so I said, Susie, could you draw for me what you experience? And she said, sure. So, I handed her the pad of paper, and she started to draw. And what you can see here is that she feels like her hands are disconnected, typical dissociative symptoms. She feels like her feet are disconnected. She felt like her organs were outside her body, like her brain was outside of her skull. She felt like her heart was in her throat, and she felt like her stomach was in her heart. And she couldn't really focus on anything visually. Her eyes were moving very rapidly, both horizontally as well as vertically. And as you will notice later on, her body is very big. And so when she was very dissociated, she perceived herself as very large. So this is the state she was in. And this is a visual image of her. So you can see she's not really able to focus on anything, right? Her posture is collapsed. She's not present, right? And we're going to compare an image of her after neurofeedback at the end. So not present, if you heard her speak, she would be incredibly slowed cognitively. And so at the time we were starting to do EEGs on people, and so we were able to capture her brain activity during one of these really slowed states, these dissociative states, where she felt completely disconnected from her body. And she also felt that her body didn't belong to her. And anybody who can read EEGs, many of you probably much better than I can, will see that she has an incredible amount of slow waves in the front of her head, and also very high beta or faster waves that are often associated with anxiety. But we hypothesized that, the significant slow waves, especially in the front of her head, may be related to that incredible cognitive slowing that she showed. And so when we compared her EEG to a normative database, people without psychiatric difficulties, this is hard to see here, she had significantly more alpha and theta waves, so slow waves of the brain. And so, we discussed doing some neurofeedback in addition to the treatment she's had. And so I really want to stress that she'd had years of treatment. She had a lot of skills, and, she'd had a lot of increased capacity in self-reflection. That wasn't online currently, but she had all this treatment in addition to ego state treatment as well. So I think she was really at a point where she was ready to engage in a significant change. So I think she really had that sense of readiness. And so what happened after only 4 sessions of this alpha neurofeedback, again in conjunction with long-term psychotherapy, was a huge change. And what Susie described was that after these 4 sessions, she was sitting at home, and she said it was a very physical experience. Suddenly, I felt myself ramming back into my body. And this was almost, an identity change for her, because now she said, I was able to feel all the emotions that I had been so detached from for years and years. So now all of a sudden, I felt all the emotions, and she was able to feel different parts of herself that had been very fragmented before. And, she came in an identity crisis, essentially. And she saw this as a big improvement, but she needed help to integrate these feelings and to really deal with this huge shift from not feeling to all of a sudden feeling both positive and negative emotions. And so because she'd had treatment and she had emotion regulation skills, she was able to deal with this fairly rapidly. And it took us about a month of twice-a-week sessions to really help her shift into her new identity. And what was really profound after was that she said she could now feel real positive feelings, that before she would just pretend to feel positive. Now those feelings were real. And what was also profound was that after a number of months, this change, she signed up to teach English as a second language in China. So she actually moved to China for a year and a half, which was like, if I had said that to her at the beginning of the treatment, she would have said, you need psychiatric treatment, Ruth. You need to be locked up. You're nuts. And so she actually went to China. And again, I remember her, sitting like this on the ward. We couldn't keep her in a room by herself. So she moved to China. She taught English as a second language. And this change in her really lasted for years. I still see her. We still process some trauma. We still do neurofeedback. But this was a really profound effect that changed her life. And concomitantly, what we saw was a decrease in these slow waves. And of course, that's what the neurofeedback had targeted. And this is how she depicted herself. So you can see that shift, right? She now has a face, she's smiling, she has hair, her hands and her feet are connected, and she's wearing a karate suit. And karate was something that was a big resource for her, because I think it helped her deal with her anger that she had dissociated for such a long period of time. So you can see that shift in her sense of self, right? And this is also really evident in these two pictures. So she moved from looking like this on the left above to looking like this on the right below. And this was in a matter of 4 months, right? Which is really amazing that it's not just a mind-brain change, but of course also a body change, because all three are so connected. And here, she really looks like a woman, right? She can attend to the present. Her posture is much more upright. And it was just an amazing shift. Really an amazing woman. And so I had a number of case examples like this of really severely ill individuals who, with doing neurofeedback, were really able to change their sense of self and change their quality of life. And now I just want to show you how we can change that network that likely underlies the sense of self in trauma with this form of neurofeedback. So we did a randomized controlled trial of 20 weekly sessions of alpha neurofeedback versus a sham condition where people got neurofeedback from another participant, not their own brain neurofeedback. So to really help us compare directly real versus fake neurofeedback. And we measured how individuals did clinically, also via EEG, and also via fMRI scans. And we're still analyzing a lot of that data, but these are some of the early findings. So you can see in the sham, so the fake neurofeedback condition, people show a decrease in PTSD symptoms, and they had a trauma-informed therapist, and they had centered attention by looking at the computer screen. So you see some improvement. But the people in the real neurofeedback condition do much better. So you can see more of a decrease here. And what I think is exciting is that at 3-month follow-up, 61% in the real neurofeedback condition no longer met criteria for post-traumatic stress, whereas only 33% of the participants in the sham group no longer met criteria for PTSD. And we had no dropouts in either group, and I really want to thank our study therapists for this, because I think that shows, getting somebody through a sham condition through fake neurofeedback is not easy, but we have incredibly committed therapists, both Stephanie Neville and Barb Whalen, who treated individuals, as well as Chantel Lloyd, who really, I think, did an amazing job with the participants, and that's why I think we also had that good treatment outcome of the sham condition. So I briefly want to talk about the default mode network, and that's the network we're thinking really underlies that sense of self in the aftermath of trauma. And so this is a default mode network of somebody who hasn't been traumatized, of somebody who doesn't have post-traumatic stress. And we can see that there's really good connectivity here. So the back part of the network helps us to recall the past, and the front part of the network helps us to have a future, helps us to know what we feel, and really helps us to have a sense of time as well. And this part of the network here in the parietal lobe helps us to have an embodied sense of ourselves. And we know that all these things are very much disrupted in trauma. So how does this network look like in trauma? and it looks like this. So you don't have to be a neuroscientist, right? This network is profoundly disrupted in the aftermath of trauma. We don't have connectivity with the front of the brain that helps us to know what we feel, that helps us to have a future. And we don't have connectivity with a part of our brain that helps us to have an embodied sense of ourselves in space. Basically, we're stuck in the past. The only part of the network that connects is the network that is really involved with recall of the past. So, of course, what we want to do in treatment is we want to move from this bottom picture to the top picture, right? So we want to reconnect this network, right? And we want to shift that sense of self. And we know as clinicians that we can do that, right? Otherwise, none of us would be here tonight. We know we can shift that sense of self. We know that the brain is plastic. We know that the brain is malleable. So it's nice to see that we can bring this network back online and after 20 sessions of neurofeedback, and that's what I want to show you. And so after treatment, you can see that this front part of the default mode network comes back online. This is what this brain dot shows here. And so we're able to bring online this front part of the network here after neurofeedback. And we would hypothesize that bringing online this front part of the network underlies that change in the sense of self that we saw in Susie, as we just described. No changes in brain networks were shown for the sham condition, so for the fake neurofeedback, which I thought was really interesting. So it was really the real neurofeedback only that showed changes in these brain networks. And so I think neurofeedback really in the context of an integrative treatment approach, which I think is critical for complex trauma, really helps us to move from this traumatized self with this really disconnected default mode network to the recovered self, where those brain network connections are reestablished. And I think that gives us a sense of hope, and I think it really validates our clinical experience. And I'll leave it at that for tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, can I say one thing about the dorsolateral, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex part of your brain that lights up here. It's a part of your brain that allows you to know tomorrow is another day. Yeah. We all know what it feels like to feel like crap. But, if you're not a very traumatized person, you go like, oh, but tomorrow the sun will shine, or tomorrow I'll see my kids, or tomorrow I'll go for a bicycle ride, or so you know that this too shall end. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, you are where all of us has been at some point in our lives. Most of us have had our hearts broken, and when your heart is broken, you feel like, I will never be the same. I'll never recover my capacity to love anybody. And then before long, it comes back. When the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex goes back online, say, oh, there's a future. There's a hope. There's things I can do. And that is such an important part of being a well-functioning human being, to not get stuck in how unpleasant the present may be, but to go like, okay, this sucks, but I can go for a walk and I'll feel better. So when you lose that, you cannot do anything to make yourself feel better. And,
absolutely.
And I want to amplify this because that is what we run into in many of the people we see, is that they are so stuck in feeling miserable that they really have a hard time making use of psychotherapy, because they're too upset, too anxious, too freaked out, too scared to actually take in the milk of human kindness, to take in the capacity to reflect. And so that's really how we got into neurofeedback. And I will turn it over to Sebern.
Well, thank you both. Having been one of these people that we're describing, it's exactly accurate. And for me, anyway, I was very dedicated psychotherapy patient and did try all kinds of approaches. For me, the thing that really changed, and the reason I am so passionate about neurofeedback, the thing that really changed was neurofeedback. And I knew nothing about the brain other than some receptor sites for chemicals that we would give out, the psychiatrist would give out. But I had no idea of the circuitry domain of the brain, and none of that made sense to me. But I tried this, and it was remarkable. So it's changed my life, and I am, and I'm here just to talk to you a little bit about how you get into this field, or get back into this field if you have made some investment in equipment or training, and it's been a while. And to urge you to do so, because I think for most people with these kinds of histories, it's inevitable. I mean, all of these things, we could show probably 100 more slides that represent how big a problem this is for the brain before it becomes a kind of problem for the personality or for the mind or for the relationships and so on. So we have to clear up the brain problem. And right now, anyway, the most efficacious learning approach is using neurofeedback. It can be a steep learning curve. And I think that when Bessel and Ruth are both neuroscientists, I'm not, and I don't do research, and I didn't do research. This was all first-person experience, and then watching and learning neurofeedback and learning and watching with other people that, with my patients and other people that wanted to try this. I don't do it casually. I think it's a very profound intervention. When you get a sense of that from the stories that Ruth and Bessel have shared. So I'm just going to go through the sort of what I call the 5 considerations. It sounds a little Buddhist. That you have to think about when you're considering this. I think every sacrifice that neurofeedback makes of you, financial, time, paradigm shifts, having to rethink things, all of that is worth it, but that's going to be for you to decide. The first thing is, I think that for traumatized people, neurofeedback always needs to be done within the frame of psychotherapy. And we're not putting somebody off in a room and training their brains and going to lunch, coming back and unhooking them. I do want to say to my esteemed colleagues here that I don't do neurofeedback on or to anybody. I only do neurofeedback for or with, and it's really, those pronouns are really important because this is such a powerful learning opportunity for the brain, but we are interfacing and we are often leading the brain to make particular waves or not make particular waveforms. That's what we're all, in most systems we're doing. So know that from the beginning that this is a technique, an approach that is really for the brain, and the psychotherapy is for the relationship and to help people figure out what these changes are that are happening to their minds, to their sense of self, to what their future career might be, and often the whole shift is from the past to the present and even to the future. A lot of shift from going over and over and over and over the terrible events and starting to feeling the grief of having done neurofeedback at age 60 for the first time or whatever, and having lived in this fear-driven brain for all this time. But there are so many different things that can happen. You really want to be well trained as a therapist before you start using neurofeedback. And that's not a standard in the field. Neurofeedback by most companies is sold to anybody who wants to buy it. There's secondhand markets. This is going to become even a bigger problem because it's becoming, because of Bessel and Ruth's work, and people are starting to get an idea that there's something to this, and we really have to pay attention to this. And more people getting into the making devices and making systems. And so you just want to think through this and ask ask about what this, how these systems work and what's been used in research and so on. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to be checking out what's the best training you can get, and and how does that fit with your clinical training? Are the people that are doing the training, do they understand the clinical dilemmas of trauma and attachment rupture? When Bessel interviewed my patients after we met initially, his first question to me after they had left, he said, "Tell me how you think the attachment systems come back on." And they do. And I think it is through lowering fear. And with this very thing that Ruth is now showing us, that the default mode network comes online. So there's a sense of self and other. And it was, I think, Bessel, you said in everybody you interviewed, that was the most stunning thing that you saw. So you want to have people that are training you in how to use this technology understand these things too. All right, and that's just not widespread yet. So you have to look around. Training is ongoing. Continuing education has never had more meaning than it does with neurofeedback, because there are breakthroughs in the neuroscience that require breakthroughs in the technology or how to use the technology. You want a system where you have good technical support, because most of us have become therapists for a reason. We didn't become computer engineers. We don't have those particular set of strengths. So good technical support for and a reliable system are good things. The insurance picture right now, just quickly, I don't know, because I want to give you time to ask questions. So the insurance picture is hopefully changing. COVID has, of course, played havoc with that too. But there is a very current attempt to get insurance to cover neurofeedback right now at the same rate that you would get as a psychotherapist. But in the future, it is recognized that there's a lot of investment that you don't make as a standard talk therapist when you're doing neurofeedback. So to cover those costs, those ongoing training costs, as well as the cost of the system. I want to recommend to you that you think about clinical neurofeedback, which is the term that I like to use. Every system that is built, every neurofeedback system has the fundamental algorithm in that system is based on the developer's idea of how the brain works. And none of us know how the brain works. We can know, we're just starting to get an idea of when it doesn't work, what kinds of things are happening, but we don't know how the brain works. So but this computer brain interface is going to depend entirely on somebody's idea of how that works as they build the system around that. The system that I use has been designed from the get-go with clinical input, with psychotherapists saying this and I need that and this doesn't work for that and so on. And the programmer, knowing that he didn't understand those things at all, and he just was going to have conversations with therapists so that he could build in what they needed. All neurofeedback comes through companies now. It doesn't come through universities. It comes, through people who have put an enormous amount of often their own houses are on, been mortgaged to keep these systems going, and through sales. So it's always a little difficult to sort out what kind of approach and do they understand these clinical issues. So who is attracted to different systems depends on what the clinical, how clinical you are and how much you want to incorporate this into psychotherapy. One of the things that changes very quickly is psychoeducation. You're going to start to emphasize psychoeducation. You're going to start to help your patients know about their brains. This is so vital. And it often destigmatizes in one conversation. When people know this is not about themselves as bad people, as defective people. It is about circuitry in the brain that is not working well. Hope is restored and stigma is reduced. It does require, I think, your psychoeducation. It does require that you keep up with the neuroscience. And for right now, I tend to agree wholeheartedly with Bessel. That's mostly keeping up with Ruth Lanius, who's here, right? Because she's the one who's doing the most research. Bessel has published 2 very important papers as well, and we maybe talk about those too. And it helps us to continue with the psychoed helps us helps us to continue to think about the brain and trauma and to keep getting reinforced that none of us have been trained that way, but to now that this is where the, as it were, the action is, the terrible action. You want to get mentoring, and Bessel will have something to say about that, and Alicia, and trying to establish mentoring groups. And I think for the first year anyway, weekly is a good idea, but whatever amount of time you can give to it. And when you're looking for a mentor, the amount of neurofeedback experience they've had is obviously very important. But as I've just been saying, they have to understand about attachment. They have to understand about trauma as well. So, and you're always with the mentor looking for a fit, right? So there's some good, very good people out there in the field of neurofeedback, but they're not necessarily experienced in working with trauma. And those of you on this webinar, I'm assuming most of you are interested in trauma. So there are issues with integrating neurofeedback and psychotherapy. This is point 5, and I sort of melded these together. But as you can get an idea from the case studies that were just described, everything can change from your startle response to your sense of self and being in the world. I mean, that's a wide range. This isn't just to extinguish symptoms. It is, I mean, that would be great if that's what it was, but it actually allows for the development of these networks. And it will impact, as Bessel suggested, it will impact your relationships. It will impact your relationship with your patients. Your patients, too, will become more assertive. And they very, in my experience anyway, very quickly pick up this paradigm and are in it with me when they stop talking about themselves as borderline or even as traumatized people, but as aroused or too aroused, or I was too, whatever the instance is, that they start to think about themselves as having a brain problem that we are correcting. And they start to tell me about what protocols they think would be useful. They become a team member in this treatment. And that has major implications for the transference and major implications for how agile we need to be as therapists. Training takes time, and it takes time out of the therapy session. Or it takes time away from the intense focus between the therapist and the patient. And this can create problems. That's an issue that we will talk about in ongoing mentoring sessions and how to manage that. Because the fundamental issue, it seems to me, with people who have had these attachment ruptures is fear of losing you. And so there is having to work through the actual time problem, the pragmatics of time, in that you were going to spend some of the time training in a session. Typically, when we were first learned about neurofeedback, the early training was that you would have to, the early understanding was that you'd have to train the brain for up to 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes was typical. And we're really finding that for some brains, as little as 3 minutes can make an enormous difference depending again on protocol and on the individual brain. But I rarely train for more than 12 minutes of training time, so that I meet for a full hour. So people do have time to talk with me about what effects they felt from the last training, make some adjustments if that's necessary, and then talk about whatever is ongoing. I have made a point I write about this a lot in the book, which I can show you. I happen to have it here. I write a lot about this in the book, and that that if somebody is having some negative transference reaction to you, or really a transference reaction, and they come in with that, I train right away. I say, we'll have whatever conversation we need to have. This is just one little tidbit of what we could be talking about. Well, we can talk about anything that you want to talk about, but let's do it after you train. And it's a completely different conversation than if we had launched into it before the experience, somewhat like what Ruth was describing, and her whole system getting quieter. And then you have a different therapeutic possibility. So those are just some of the things we're going to outline, and we wanted to leave a half an hour, which I think is what we have, for questions. And I'm here, and Ruth is here, and Bessel's here.
Bessel, you're muted.
There's a lot of questions and a lot of very important questions. First thing, let's start with this. What research-based outcomes are available at this point? Not a question, but a request. It's a very important issue. When I got involved in neurofeedback, I was really quite astonished by how little real serious clinical research there was, and how people, was more of a testimonial field than anywhere else. And I thought, no wonder insurance companies won't reimburse it, because you need to prove that things work. And so I made it my job to do these studies. And so I did 3 studies actually on PTSD and trauma, which were the first studies in 30 years that people actually did studies like this. And we showed it was very effective. That has not been translated into insurance companies reimbursing it yet. But I think a very important reason why both Ruth and we do these studies is to really show that this works, this is effective. So a very big issue here is money, and also that interface that Sebern talks about is how do you get people to do this? And just in the past 24 hours, again, I'm impressed with how many universities are beginning to set up brain-computer interface departments. It's a very hot topic. And what they study are very complex transmagnetic cranial stimulation instruments that are very expensive. Why do universities study that? Because there's corporations that fund universities to do studies on these very expensive pieces of equipment. If you're a fancy university and you study a fancy apparatus, before too long, you'll probably get insurance companies to reimburse you. This is really, to some degree, what we're talking about, a political issue, in that neuroscience could be practiced in schools, in residential treatment settings, in all kinds of settings, but it's low tech in some ways. And low tech is not very appealing to universities, hospitals, where people like to do high tech stuff. I'd like to hear Ruth's contradictions of what I'm saying. But up to now, neurofeedback has not been really subject to a lot of investigations other than from us and from, for example, a guy in London, John Gruselier, who studies a paradigm that I love. It's about performance enhancement. Neurofeedback is not about trauma. Neurofeedback is to help to regulate your brain. And so when your brain is dysregulated in one form or another, neurofeedback can help you to regulate it. The Italian soccer team figure that one out. So they got trained in neurofeedback, and they won the world championship playing soccer, having their brain just a little bit more better. The Canadian ski team, when the Olympics were in Canada, they all got trained in neurofeedback, and they got all the gold medals.
Playing the gold, right? Yes, and they did.
So neurofeedback is not about getting rid of your trauma. Neurofeedback is to help you to just function, to just do, to be alive, and to use your capacities. Now, so we need much more research, but we also need a lot more. And I'm going to say something, and then I'm going to go to other questions. And that is that a lot of people ask, where can I get neurofeedback? And I found it a very challenging issue. And that, I don't know many neurofeedback providers. I've sent people to Scottsdale, Arizona, let me see who does neurofeedback, and I send somebody there. They usually come back being disappointed. So one of the things that we are interested in TRF, the Trauma Research Foundation, through which we're doing this, is for you, if you have had a good neurofeedback experience, or if you think you're a very good neurofeedback provider, send us your information. We'd love to get a database of people who we can refer people to, with whom people have good experiences, because such a database currently does not exist, and is a crapshoot about what will happen when you go to some neurofeedback clinic. And I'm actually very unhappy about it, because it's, traumatized people are not rich people, and they need to get good care. And at this point, it's very hard to channel people to a good care system. Maybe both of you would like to respond to. There's a lot of questions about that, actually.
Well, I think that's true. I think that, this field came out of physicists and electrical engineers in their garages, and also some work with Barry Sturman on stopping seizures. And it was just, if you can teach a brain how to stop a seizure, a grand mal seizure, you can probably teach your brain to do anything, right? Yeah. And so, but I don't think, the Eager system, which I use, has got good clinical training. I don't think that, I can't assess anybody else's because I haven't done it, but that's the first thing that's important. And so often when therapists did decide to use neurofeedback, they would decide to use it because they weren't good therapists. It's like they wanted something new. They wanted some other income stream. This is not across the board. There are many of my colleagues on this.
Can I interrupt for a second? There's a lot of questions, but how do I find a good neurotherapist? Do you have any sort of suggestions, like what you look for?
Well, I tried to say a little bit about that in the, in the amount of experience that they've had, your sense of fit with them. It's how do you find a good therapist? And then you have to find somebody who's also learned this. It's not separate. It's just, a good therapist is going to learn to do this as well as they can. And they're going to look for their support systems, and they're going to come to me or some of the other people that are, that are really good in this field. But it's just not a lot of people. It's just, it came in a different door, didn't come in the treatment door per se. It came in a lot through performance enhancement or seizure, then an ADHD. And then really this is the conversation that started in 2008 or whenever it was, Bessel, where we're bringing it into trauma. It hasn't been there very long. I think if the person is a good therapist, they will have devoted themselves to learning this well and not be flamboyant about it. And but it's the same thing. Do you trust this person? Is the fit good? Are they a good therapist for you? Right? Because I think this should be combined in the same session in the same room with the same person. Not if at all possible, sent off to some other neurofeedback person.
Ruth, any thoughts about it?
Huh?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I often think you actually have to be a better therapist when you do neurofeedback, because more things come up more quickly. And so you really have to be equipped to deal with more intense emotion and the emotions coming up at a more rapid rate. And, I think you get a more rapid shift in identity and a more rapid shift in the sense of self. And I think, of course, a change in the sense of self is terrifying for traumatized individuals, right? It's absolutely terrifying. So really having a therapist who can process some of the changes as they're coming online, I think is absolutely critical.
I have another thought about this.
Yeah.
That is that when you look for who to go for neurofeedback, there's two distinct streams of thought in neurofeedback. One is to take your brain and to train your brain to become a normal brain. That's not our method. Once you know something about trauma, and once you see all these brain scans that we see that traumatized people have incredibly disturbed, messed up, crazy brains, but they are able to do amazing things with strangely wired brains. The research of Marty Teicher, who comes to the trauma conference every year, shows that if you have been traumatized and you're not symptomatic, your brain looks almost the same as somebody who is traumatized who has a lot of problems. So your brain really gets changed by trauma, and you shouldn't be trained to get a normal brain. You should be trained to get a functioning brain. And I think that's really a major issue, in that many of the brain systems, like, okay, let's see what's going on in your brain. Okay, we're going to make you a normal brain, and they don't check in what's happening to you. So that's, to my mind, a very important criterion, is that the person you work with is interested in you and how you are responding and how you're feeling better and what works for you. And if it doesn't work, the particular settings don't work for you, they say, let's try something else. To be always experimental, always trying things out, always comparing your clinical data with your EEG data.
Mm-hmm. Right. And yeah, and it's a weekly assessment, and it's a shared assessment, you and your patient. And you have to listen to your patient, because otherwise you are believing more in the algorithm than you are in the person, and in the algorithm that's in the system that you've been using, rather than listening to your patient. So you have to have a system that's agile to follow those reports and to make changes. That's a whole training, many trainings, but it's a premise that you want to have as you start to think about getting into the field, or even as you, yeah.
So here's the next question. How can neurofeedback help me overcome my chronic anxiety and hypervigilance? I was adopted into a family where my father was abusive. His brother in the home I believe sexually took advantage of me around age 5. He died in a fire explosion in front of me at age 5. All trauma in the household fell under a code of silence. My mother just tried to get peace with my volatile father, etc., etc. That's a very familiar story to all of us. How do you think about neurofeedback for a person like that?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry all of that happened to you, and it's coded though in your brain in the fear circuitry. I mean, it's the fear circuitry that I think you're calling anxiety, and we can lower the amplitude of that fear reactivity with neurofeedback. And that's the whole goal. That's the only reason that I do this thing. I'm not a computer person. I expect to sit and talk to people, right? But I wasn't making them better. And someone who's lived through what you've lived through is living with all of the not even so much the memories of what happened, but just the coding of fear, CODING, coding of fear that goes on, and that you're going to be, as you described, you're hypervigilant, you're going to be scanning the environment. All of that can quiet down and would quiet your central nervous system. So that's the goal of all neurofeedback.
And I think what's so exciting is that I think a lot of these fear, terror, and shock responses really come from very deep within the brain, the reptilian brain, which is lower than our limbic brain and lower than our amygdala. It's deep within the brainstem. And the really exciting piece of this is that, a lot of therapies don't reach that deep within the brain, but neurofeedback, we've actually shown, can affect circuitry directly tied to that very deep level of the brain, the reptilian brain, that deals with raw emotion like terror, fear, shock, rage. And so really allowing to go that deep, I think, can have a profound effect to really soothe and calm the brain and make it much more quiet.
It's fear and reactivity.
Right.
That's what I think we're targeting all the time. And if we could lower reactivity and throughout in all little systems in the family, big systems in our societies, we would be going a long way toward, peace in the world. But at least get peace for you. And I think that the only way that we have to get this conversation going with the brain, and you have to find somebody who can do training with you. And as Bessel said, has a agile idea that doesn't get stuck in the idea that you're normalizing a brain, which is really the brain map approach, because you really have got to work with the individual responses that a person has to the experience. It's so unique. It's like, I talk about the EEG. Everybody, is a unique thumbprint, and I think, well, the EEG is the sort of quantum thumbprint for the individual. And so, and that we could think that any one algorithm is going to address every one of those brains and those unique configurations. As much as there are there are similarities, everyone is unique. And so we have to follow all of that with our system and be humble with the brain, and humble with our systems, humble with the whole experience. But in most people, I would say, I don't know, I won't give a percentage, but I would say easily 90% of people that I have worked with anyway have felt a quieting of fear, lifting of mood, change in cognitive abilities, better judgment, all of the things that we hope for in treatment of trauma.
And also coming to the present, right? And coming back into your body, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But we come back to the systemic issue. I'll give the first answer. Information and enthusiasm about neurofeedback for developmental trauma is increasing, but there are not nearly enough trauma therapists trained in neurofeedback to meet the need. There are providers who say they're trained to treat trauma, but in practice they don't understand the complexity. And the people keep spending a lot of money, and so oftentimes it doesn't work. I completely see that all the time. And I think from a consumer point of view, this field is not well developed. And so at the Trauma Research Foundation, we're trying to begin to set up some of these things. In April 15th, if you go on the website, Angelica Sadar is starting a 6-week training with mentorships. That is sort of a beginning of helping create more opportunities to get trained, more opportunities to get mentored, more opportunities to meet peer groups. I specifically talked about my peer group at the Trauma Center because I think in order to get trained, you should not get trained alone. Ruth had a wonderful team around her. I don't know if Sebern had a wonderful team, but she has a wonderful husband. And I had a great team. And so I think you learn this as a team. And I'm very much encouraging you to take these trainings as a group, to buy this somewhat expensive equipment as a group, and to really become each other's peer group to some degree. But we're going to try to set up serious mentoring programs. And I hope that someday Sebern will sort of send us a list of people who she has trained, who we can go to, because right now we don't know who Sebern has trained.
Right.
Sebern has an amazing group of people.
Yeah.
We want to know who they are and how we can reach them.
Right. Yes, but all of this is true, and And it's really the excitement in the field is that trauma, I mean, people keep wanting to refer their traumatized people to me. And I'm saying, no, 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 you have to learn how to do this, right? This is the whole deal. We have to rethink everything. It can't be that you make a referral for this adjunct thing. It has to be, I mean, that will go on, but it's not ideal. Ideally, this is happening within the relationship. So Ruth notices those changes that are slowly coming. She's able to validate with Susie what, and Susie is able to educate Ruth about what is happening, what's changing in her brain. And that goes into the research. So,
will you put out a list of people you have trained who you trust? Because people are really at a loss. They don't know where to go. And clearly, you can't do it all.
Can I wait till I get my cast off, and then can I wait till I get the cast off, and then I will write.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. But because at the Trauma Research Foundation, we really go to try to do some of that. But I very much encourage you to write to us. If you think you're the right person we're looking for, let us know. We'll send people to you until we get 5 people saying to us, no, it didn't work. We go like, maybe it's not such a good person. Huh? But we'd like to have lists of people to send people to, and let us know what your experiences are. Also, Debbie Ingraham has a Facebook page. I'm not quite sure how open it is, but if you type in neurofeedback for developmental trauma, her page is likely to come up. And she's really collecting experiences of people going through neurofeedback who are consumers, who are talking to each other. And to my mind, it's a fantastic thing. At the end, the judgment needs to come from the consumers more than the people like us, because we always have secondary interests. We always have secondary interests. Does our department like us? Do we get enough money for research, etc.? But people who have gone through the experience themselves have pretty pure motives and to be able to say, this is what helped me and that's how it helped me.
Yeah.
Ruth, what do you think?
I just wanted to bring up that, of course, it's great to have an eager system like Sebern uses, and the training is wonderful. But technology is also advancing at a very rapid rate here, and I think that's really important to realize. And so, for example, there is a device called the Muse. A lot of you will be familiar with it. That really is neurofeedback-assisted meditation. And the Muse is working together with a company called MindLift. It's an Israeli-based company. And together, they've come up with a very simple way of doing some of the most widely used neurofeedback protocols. This is widely available and can be used by therapists with, less extensive training in neurofeedback. And this is also an option, if you have somebody who's more extensively trained in neurofeedback, supervising some individuals using these simpler devices, I think is a very viable option for the future. And again, technology is developing very rapidly. And I think we're going to see some real shifts in the next few years. Something I'm also really excited about is that I see a lot of young psychology and psychiatry students being interested in neurofeedback, in really being fed up with the therapy that we have at hand right now, realizing, that we need to have more and more tools in our toolbox. So I think there's a lot of hope that the younger generation will really get into this and start creating more and more of a critical mass.
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing to emphasize is that the issue of brain-computer interfaces is very hot. I have the fantasy in my mind that right now in garages all over California, people are putting little brain-computer interface things together in the same that Stephen Jobs and Stephen Wozniak 40 years ago invented the computer. This is a very hot topic. New stuff will come out all the time, and everything that comes out, people will say, this is the greatest thing since sliced cheese or whatever. Because people always like to exaggerate how great they are. But at the same time, have an open mind. And it just may be great. So the system that we use, that we got trained on, is a nice system. We don't use many other systems, and we don't know if this is a better system than other systems. And because we live in a capitalistic culture, people want to sell their equipment. But our job is actually to make people better. And so our job is to find out what equipment is available for whom, like the Muse and the Mind Lift, that might be a very cheap alternative for people to actually begin to do stuff like that themselves. There's another simple thing called a Proteus. It's a sound light machine to change binaural beats. It's very nice. So it's really worth exploring stuff. It's good to get trained by somebody like Sebern or Ed Hamlin or Angelica. But at the end, once you get trained, you should feel very free to explore a whole range of different options, because this keeps evolving over time. Is there any arguments about that or thoughts about it?
No, completely agreed.
Good.
Somebody asked if neurofeedback can be used for children as opposed to be done on children. And yes, Bessel does have a study of that too. Children can really love this. If you want to see a extraordinary video, look up severe ADHD in Melbourne, Australia, and neurofeedback. Google that, and you'll see an extraordinary video that shows you what can happen with children who train their brains. It's very helpful for kids, actually, and I would like it very much if kids never reached puberty with having to suffer the effects what happened in early childhood, that could be addressed. And Bessel and I have had long talks about addressing this through the schools, addressing the whole issue of self-regulation in every grade in some manner, and to have neurofeedback available, because you are really working for optimal performance, for the most you can get from this brain.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So let me tell you what my current program is. And, I'm not the only person who could do that. We are, with some help from somebody who's also online, we're going to train a whole bunch of people at our local hospital in neurofeedback. And my goal was to train people so we can go to the school system, because in my mind, the biggest public health issue in America is that we have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of kids who are too traumatized to learn and who will grow up never being able to be a useful member of society, and who will cost a gigantic amount of money. And my dream is that every school in America learns the 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and self-regulation, and that yoga and self-regulation and singing and movement all become part of a culture that teaches all of us as we're growing up, and our kids, how to regulate yourself, and that you don't have to pop a pill in order to make those feelings go away. You can actually regulate yourselves. And so my hope is that there will be neurofeedback machines in every school in America, and that we move towards to, and so that we can create that. The interesting thing that happened at my own local hospital is that people were very enthusiastic about it, and they said, but you first need to train us, because we're still at the end of the COVID pandemic, and our medical staff is so traumatized. Mm-hmm. And said, before you treat anybody else, you're going to treat us.
Oh, that's a terrific idea anyway, isn't it, Bessel?
And that's what we're going to do. But, it doesn't depend on me to do that. You can do a similar thing wherever you are, and to really teach people and to expand it and to get a cadre of people who really work together on these sort of things. The other thing is important, like Ruth and I now have done the research that shows how effective neurofeedback is. Know that research. Don't ask me what's the data. Go to Google Scholar, type in neurofeedback, type in what the research is, because the research is there. And so we have worked very hard to make the research happen. Wasn't fun. Nobody gives money. She got a bit of money from the Canadian Armed Forces, but it was very hard to get the money to do this research. And then go to your insurance people and show them the paper. We do this research not for the hell of it. It's so that you can use it to get insurance reimbursements, so it will become more widely available. And once it becomes more widely available, more people are able to train it. And so don't wait for me. I'm about to kick the bucket, but you're not.
Please.
Say,
I just wanted to add there, Bessel, we're also going to get out some lay summaries of the research because, a lot of times the neuroimaging research is very difficult to follow. So we will get some lay summaries out about the research, and I'll distribute them widely. So it's easier for people to actually understand it. And, that's the whole point of doing research, is not to have only academic publications that nobody can understand, but it's really about, putting it into a language that's accessible to everyone.
And we'll post it on the Trauma Research Foundation website.
Perfect.
Good. So hereby we have answered every one of your questions. Thank goodness. I'm so glad we could do that for you. I'm very curious. We were delighted you filled out all these questionnaires. We will go over them in great detail. We'll learn from it. We'll follow up on it. And send us your thoughts and your notes, because this is always a collective thing. And it's always about people doing things together, setting up joint enterprises to have it continue to happen. Now it's 7 o'clock.
it is, and I just want to thank you for pulling this all together. The Trauma Research Foundation. It's a very important step forward with in this profound treatment possibility for traumatized people, and it's long overdue. We need to do this, guys. Everyone out there, you have to figure out how to get training.
I embarrassed myself once at my university where I teach because I got so irritated. I said, "This person needs neurofeedback, and none of you even know neurofeedback." And it's really very painful to see that we have this powerful tool and that it is so not widely available to people. So we're really...
So this has been my life for 25 years. So I've been, so I appreciate your frustration too. So, yeah, okay. All right, everyone.
Anybody?
Can I selfishly ask a question? Somebody submitted it, but it was one that I want to know the answer to, and you didn't get to. What is your experience with misophonia and neurofeedback? I know somebody who we're going to try that treatment for, and I'd like to know.
I don't know what it is.
Is this the irritating
Sounds will trigger like a fight or flight.
right?
Yeah.
Usually somebody chewing.
That is the one I'm dealing with. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should. I haven't had that patient and I haven't heard a case described, but it feels to me that we would look at putting, I've worked with people's reaction to noise in general so I can place electrodes on the auditory cortex and bring down the reactivity. So there's always fear of reactivity, and that's reactivity, right? And it's a new disease. It's a new thing. It's where did this come from that people suddenly got worried about, particularly women being upset by their husbands or their fathers chewing, and that's now got a name. You couldn't get developmental trauma into the but this chewing problem will
that is my problem exactly. Yes.
Okay. So yes, but it's the same thing. The brain is in some way that we would have to figure out with each individual being highly reactive to something that shouldn't bother them at all.
That brings me to the last question, which we should say something about. And people say, can neurofeedback really mess people up? And the answer is absolutely. If you train the wrong frequency at the wrong place, people will become very upset and very freaked out. And that's why it's so important to really track people very, very carefully from moment to moment and to see whether the feedback that they're getting is making them quieter and calmer. On the internet, I sometimes see, oh, I started neurofeedback and I became more and more upset and angry and I killed my kids. But people said, oh, you should just continue to do neurofeedback.
No.
And I go, no. If you start feeling worse, you're doing the wrong thing, Don't keep doing the wrong thing. So you need to be with a therapist who really pays attention to you and how you are doing and who is flexible and says, oh, wow, this worked for the last 50 patients. It's not working for you. So you need something different. That's so important.
And we're back to personalizing treatment, right? It's one size does not fit all, right?
Yeah, it's very always experimental.
Yeah.
We could go on forever, but that's it.